All right, I'm going to title this one, Discipline. And what I will do, I have to give you a little backstory on this. So, in the community I reside in, I used to do workshops. I had a garage gym, and I used to do workshops. This was like maybe about 7-8 years ago. I would do fitness and nutrition workshops, meaning I would go to like churches and maybe community centers in the area, and I would talk to people about health and nutrition and fitness and working out. And I met a lot of people over the years in my community. I live in a small Northwest Indiana community, so met a lot of people. I did this for law enforcement, fire department, postal workers, small churches, kids, just regular everyday people. And I met a brother, and I won't, disclose his name, but I met a brother who, told me he wanted to work out. And over the years, I've always run into people that, used to be athletes or, used to work out, and they're older. And, if maybe they're dealing with a health condition, and they want to get back at it. And that, sometimes they reach out to me, sometimes they won't. But this brother in particular, after I met him the first time, I ran into him again in the grocery store. And I used to always tease him because I'd be like, man, we keep meeting at the grocery store, brother. I was like, man, we might as well just start running up and down the aisle, start working out here in the grocery store. But he would see me in the grocery store, a bunch of questions, talk your ear off. I'd look in his cart, look in his bag. Hey, take that out, throw that out. No, don't eat that. Don't do that. And we would even run into each other at the car wash sometimes, washing his car. I'm gonna call you, man. I'm gonna call you. That became a 10-year thing with this brother. I'm gonna call you. So today, fast forward, going to the gas station, getting some gas. The lady said, excuse me. You're Marcane, right? And I said, yeah, yes, ma'am. And then I looked at him like, I said, I'm sorry. I said, I recognize you, but I said, I can't remember your name. And she said, Miss Terry. And I said, oh, I'm like, how you doing? I'm like, yeah. I was like, I ain't seen my guy, and I was like, how's he doing? I said, I ain't seen him at the car wash, grocery store, nothing. And she said, well, he just passed a couple of weeks ago. And I said, oh, no. I was like, I'm so sorry. And I said, man, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I said, did you have the services and everything already? She said, yeah. She said, buried him, last weekend. And I said, oh my God. I said, I'm so sorry to hear that. And she said, you know what? She said, I've been talking to people and telling people that he needed discipline to take care of himself. She said a lot of things had changed with him and with both of us health-wise after COVID. And, she said, I only remember you because your card, she's like, he kept your card at the house on the refrigerator. And the card that she's talking about is an older card and it had a picture of me on it. So she said, that's the only reason I recognize you. But she said, we even talked about calling you together one time to exercise. And she said, because I kept telling him, we know somebody who can help us. And she said, she said he wasn't disciplined. And I said, wow. I said, that's heavy to hear, but heavy for you to say. And she said, well, I'm just being honest, because she's like, she said, we, as I'm getting older, she's like, we got to get ourselves together. And she's like, we gotta fight to take care of ourselves, man. She said, and I told him, she said, when we were in our younger days, she said, probably around your age, she said, I told him, I ain't want to be no stereotype. She's like, I ain't want to be no typical, black woman that outlived her husband. And she said, now here I am. And I said, I said again, I'm so sorry to hear that. She said, you told us stuff years ago, and she said, and it still remains true. She said that you gotta want to do it for yourself, and she said, you gotta be disciplined. And she said, and we good at doing things that aren't beneficial to us, or they just temporary. And I said, I said, yeah. I said, I agree with you. She said, no, I'm serious, Marquain. She said, well, you know, if it's a concert or something like that, she said, we rearing up, we getting dressed, we're doing this, getting the hair done, doing nails, and da. She said, we go full force for that kind of stuff. And she said, it's only temporary. She said, but to be on this earth longer, she said, we'll make all the excuses in the world. And she said, and he did. She said, and he did. And she said, and, you know, and she said, I'm so mad at him. She said, and she started crying. And I said, can I pray?
Russia and China.
I said, can I pray with you?
The issue of terrorism.
I said, can I pray with you? And she said, sure. And I just, you know, said a quick prayer for her and everything, and just for her peace and for forgiveness, because she said she's angry with him. She's angry with him for leaving her behind. She's angry with him for not stepping up to take care of himself. And it's understandable, but in the end, she does have to forgive him for that, because I'm sure, I know this brother, you know, we talked, had a few conversations, long conversations when we were running to each other, and he loved his wife, and he loved his family, and, you know, and she said that, you know, thank you for that. And she said, you know, a lot of people will tell you that they're gonna pray for you and that they're gonna, you know, and she said, and I'm sure, you know, a lot of people do. And she said, and I understand, you know, that that's become a normal thing just to say. But she said, you know, one thing is, you know, no one's like stopped me and just said, let's pray, or, you know, and she said, she said, I really appreciate that. And she said, and I'm gonna tell you, she said, you tell this to people. She said, tell them to get their butts up and think about working hard to live and have discipline to live, instead of a bunch of crap about what they can and can't do. And I said, understandable. I said, understandable. And I said, thank you so much. So, on that note, discipline and work. Discipline and work. It matters. Gotta do it. Have discipline for yourself. That's what it takes. It's doing the things that you don't want to do sometimes, and doing it to the fullest. And once you do it every day, day after day, day after day, day after day, it becomes normal. And when it becomes normal, it becomes easier. When it becomes easier, then it becomes another challenge you got to face. So discipline, discipline, discipline. And I've always told my kids how they're going to be great at things is discipline and outworking the next person. So discipline, discipline, discipline. Fight for your life.